Hi, and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Ryan Mackenzie of the 134th Legislative District in Lehigh and Berks counties. Type 1 diabetes is a disease that affects roughly 3 million Americans, according to the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. The pancreas no longer produces the insulin that helps convert starches and sugars into the fuel the body needs. It's a disease that has no cure, but with proper management, a person with type 1 diabetes can have a long and meaningful life. Joining me today to help educate us on type 1 diabetes and show how it differs from the common type 2 is Debbie Healy. Debbie is a parent of a child with type 1 diabetes. And Debbie, welcome to the program.
Ryan, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. As you know, I did go to you back in July. We met on a Monday, July 13th, 2015. And I spoke to you at length. You gave me a good hour and 15 minutes of your time, and we talked about type 1 diabetes. And my primary concern is the lack of awareness that parents and sometimes even medical professionals have about type 1 diabetes. And I shared with you that my son Michael, at age 17, which was back 20 months ago, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes during his junior year of high school. And we were totally unprepared for that diagnosis. And he was actually very sick at the time that he was diagnosed. He was in a state of what's called diabetic ketoacidosis, when a typical blood sugar level was between 80 and 100. He was tested twice. His first test was determined that his blood glucose level was at least 600. Then they did a second test, and they said it was at least 1,400. He really was very, very sick, and we did not realize it until the day that he was diagnosed. We really thought that he just had, at most, a sinus infection.
Now, your son Michael, so what were some of the symptoms leading up to it? What did you start seeing? What were the changes there?
That's an absolutely great question. About a week, I would say, prior to him being diagnosed, he had mentioned to me that he had blurry vision. And I honestly was surprised by that, but then I thought to myself, well, sometimes our vision changes as we get older, and just because he never had a problem with vision in the past doesn't mean he couldn't have one, at age 17. So I said to him, okay, well, I'll make a doctor's appointment. Well, and I did make an appointment for the eye doctor, but he ended up becoming diagnosed with type 1 diabetes prior to the actual doctor's appointment. So that was one really important symptom, a red flag.
And now, is that a common symptom that
yes, it is.
Okay.
It really is.
Yep.
And in addition to that, the day before he was diagnosed was a Sunday. He was diagnosed on Monday, as I said, March 17, 2014. So an easy way to remember that was it was St. Patrick's Day. So the day before he was diagnosed, we were on our way to church. And he said to us, before we even got to church, he said, I am really thirsty. Would you please pull over? Would you please let me get something to drink? And we chided him. We scolded him. We said, really? We're on our way to church. You really can't wait. He said, I am just so thirsty, please. And I said, okay, if you really need to get something to drink, go get some water. And I thought to myself, well, he does appear to have a sinus infection, so maybe that's why he's thirsty, because I know when I get a sinus infection, I'm very thirsty. So that was another sign that he was very thirsty. Then we went to church, and before Mass was even over, he said, excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom. And I said, really? You can't wait? Mass is almost over. And he said, no, I really need to go to the bathroom. And that was another sign, frequent urination.
Okay.
So the following day, March 17, 2014, he said to us, I just really don't feel well. I don't think I can go to school today, which really was a shock because he was the kind of kid that never missed school, and he loved school and National Honor Society. He was an athlete. So we thought, wow, he really must not be feeling well if he's saying he wants to stay home. And my husband stayed home with him in the morning, and I went to work and actually tutored that evening. I didn't get home till about 7, but I thought about him all day. I thought how strange it was that he was not going to school. And I did send him a text, and I said, how are you doing? And he just responded by saying, I'm in the basement. So I went home that evening, and I went down to the basement, and it was dark. I said, Michael, you need to come upstairs. I haven't seen you all day. Please come upstairs so I can just see how you're doing. Well, when he came upstairs, I actually did get a good look at him, and I said, oh my gosh. I was so scared because he had a very sunken in look to him. He didn't even look like himself. So when I say sunken in, I mean like dehydrated. You could really like see the bones in his face and everything. And I remember thinking, we have a serious problem. I don't know what the serious problem is, but we have to get him to the hospital. And I called my husband and I said, you need to come home right now. Something's wrong with Michael. And he said, I'm within 5 minutes, I'll be home. And then when my husband came home, my husband's a very calm and logical person, he looked at me and he was actually really scared. And we said to Michael, listen, go get fully dressed, because I might have been wearing shorts at that point or something. I said, we're going to take you to the hospital. And then we took him to Lehigh Valley Hospital.
Yeah. So again, blurry vision, dehydration, frequent urination, those are the symptoms Michael experienced. Are those are common symptoms?
Yes, and fatigue. And fatigue.
Okay.
And then the other thing, and this was really important too, and I didn't catch on to immediately because it was March and he was wearing heavy clothes. Another thing was he had actually lost a good 10 to 15 pounds.
Wow. Okay.
And so that is a red flag. If your child is suddenly losing weight, you have to say, what in the world's going on here?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's great. So all of those things are items that parents can be looking for in their children.
Yes.
And then when you do think something might be wrong or you might suspect type 1 diabetes, what's your next step? What should a parent do then?
The most important thing to do is to act quickly and to get your child to the doctor immediately, and say if that doctor is not able to see your child that day, then you need to go to the emergency room. You cannot wait. And at that point they can do a glucose test and they can determine if there's elevated glucose level. Okay, but please just don't wait. And I say that in sincerity because we were told if we had waited another day, our son might not have survived, and that's not an exaggeration. So if you see those
so it's
signs,
that serious.
it really is.
Okay. And so now, what's the time frame when somebody develops type 1 diabetes until which you have the opportunity to diagnose and treat? What's that time frame typically look like?
I can only say that there are stages where, someone has the antibodies, which is indicating a predisposition for type 1 diabetes, and they may or may not actually develop it. But once they become symptomatic, what we talked about today, you must immediately get treatment. So it's hard to say how long somebody can actually wait at that point before they are going to become extremely ill. But the signs we talked about indicate that person is nearing something called diabetic ketoacidosis, or actually is in diabetic ketoacidosis. And once they're in a state of diabetic ketoacidosis, serious things can happen, like they can go into a coma, they can suffer brain damage, and they can die. So when any of those signs are present, that's why you immediately realize you need to take this child to the doctors, because the child either is going to be in a state of diabetic ketoacidosis or already is in that state.
And so at that point, it's already advanced pretty far. Is there anything prior to that you can do to test for type 1 diabetes or become more aware or take any measures to help prevent getting to that point?
Well, I can tell you that type 1 diabetes, when we talk about the origin or the causation, there are genetic factors for some people. There are also environmental factors for others. So if I would say to you, if you have a family member who has an autoimmune disease, and not necessarily type 1 diabetes, but say in my case, I have the Hashimoto's thyroiditis, then consider having your child tested. They call it TrialNet, and they can test for the antibodies to see if they're there. That would indicate perhaps a predisposition to type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
But the important thing to remember about that is that sometimes you have to take that test more than once. So say, for example, Michael didn't develop type 1 diabetes until he was 17. If he had had that test, that TrialNet test, to indicate that the antibodies are present that indicate predisposition for type 1 diabetes, maybe if he had had it at age 1 or 2, maybe we wouldn't have seen those antibodies. But so that's why you have to sometimes have it 2 times, sometimes even 3 times. But that's a really good test that indicates that individual may end up developing type 1 diabetes.
And so you mentioned people who have a predisposition or a higher likelihood of it.
Yes.
So obviously genetic factors, is there anything else that is common as a predisposition or a factor that leads to it?
Well, like I said, the autoimmune diseases.
Okay.
So when Michael was in the hospital, one of the first questions they asked us is, does anybody in your family have a history of autoimmune diseases? So that would be revealing that, there's an indication of genetics in type 1 diabetes. But then there are other people who say to me, we don't have any family members with autoimmune diseases. And so they speak to the issue of environmental causes. And you know what? There are many theories about that. Some people say it could be related to introducing cow's milk too early. Some people say it could be related to the overuse of antibiotics. Some people say viruses. It's really not very clear-cut in terms of the environmental factors, but there are environmental factors as well.
Okay, great. What else should we know, or what else should parents or anybody else who's dealing with this or thinking about it, what should they be aware of?
What I really hope that people understand is that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. It is not related to your diet. It's not related to a lack of exercise. It has nothing to do with that. It's an autoimmune disease, meaning the body is suddenly attacking the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin. It's very serious. Type 1 diabetes is on the rise, and the subsequent issue of diabetic ketoacidosis, which happens when we have undiagnosed or misdiagnosed type 1 diabetes, or even type 2 diabetes too. When we have diabetic ketoacidosis, they say it's a very serious, life-threatening situation. Well, that too is on the rise. And interestingly enough, about 1/3 of children, when they're initially diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, are in a state of diabetic ketoacidosis. That's very scary.
Absolutely. Well, Debbie, we have about 2 minutes left, and the thing that I want to talk about next is actually what we're going to do on this topic to help raise awareness. In addition to having you on the show today, we also are going to be passing or introducing a resolution in the House of Representatives and bringing more awareness to the entire state on this topic. Tell us a little bit about the resolution that I'm going to be sponsoring today and how we came to that resolution.
Okay. So when I met with you back July 13, 2015, we talked about 5 different ways that we could prevent diabetic ketoacidosis. You and I know we can't prevent type 1, but we can prevent diabetic ketoacidosis. So one of the things we talked about is parent education. We said it's so important that parents know the signs of type 1 diabetes, because then they can get their child to the doctor immediately. And if I had known sooner, maybe I would have gotten my child to the doctor sooner. So you and I talked about something that was created in North Carolina called Regan's Rule. And in North Carolina, a child named Regan Oxidine died because her physician mistakenly thought that she had reflux, and she did not have reflux, and treated her accordingly. And then, unfortunately, it wasn't reflux, it was type 1 diabetes. So her mother said, we have to make something good come of this, and we have to make sure that people are aware of the signs of type 1 diabetes. And they created Regan's Rule in the form of a bill. And in that case, it is encouraging physicians to talk to parents about type 1 diabetes, the signs of type 1 diabetes, at age birth through age 5, at every year, so at birth 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, at well checks. And we use that model here in Pennsylvania to create House Resolution 569. Now ours is not worded exactly the same way, but my understanding is that healthcare practitioners will be encouraged to talk to parents about the signs of type 1 diabetes.
That's correct, and absolutely. And so I want to thank you, Debbie, for bringing this issue to my attention. And I'm glad we are going to be able to have a greater platform and voice on the issue here in Pennsylvania through the resolution. And we're going to hopefully take that up and pass that successfully through the House today. So do want to thank you for that. And also, again, just thank you for your advocacy on the issue in general about type 1 diabetes.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm Representative Ryan Mackenzie, and if you need any assistance with other state-related issues, please feel free to contact me at my local office or through my website. That information will be shown in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for another edition of Legislative Report.